Well, we're happy to have you here. So sorry for all the technical glitches, but again, super happy to be able to hear you and have this discussion with you today. So thank you for being here, Senator.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be able to do this. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties.
No worries. All right. Well, we're just going to jump right into it. I'm going to give a few brief introductions, Senator, and then we'll kind of jump into our discussion. Everyone who's on the phone and attending, I'm Jennifer Barrera with the California Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, we have our featured guest, Senator Caballero, who is represents Senate District 12, and I would be happy to go through her list of amazing accomplishments, but given our shortened time, I'm just going to kind of move along, Senator.
That's all right. That's good.
We also have with us CEO and President of the San Benito Chamber of Commerce, Michelle Leonard. We also have with us the Vice Chair of the San Benito Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and Head of their Business Advocacy, excuse me, I couldn't say that, Committee, Victor Gomez. Welcome, Victor. We also have Shay Scar, who is the Member Services of Salinas Chamber of Commerce. And then we have our own Adam Regali, who is our lead on housing, land use, environmental policy here at California Chamber of Commerce. So thank you, everyone, for being here and participating today. We really appreciate you being here. All right, without further ado, Senator, we wanted to kind of do a look forward and a look backwards in our discussion today. And so we'll start with kind of doing a look backwards on 2020 and the legislative session that just was finished in September. Why don't you, if you can, kind of give us a brief overview of the 2020 legislative session, the challenges, obviously, that everyone faced as a result of the pandemic and how that had an impact on legislation, process, the entire session, if you could.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me thank you for organizing this. I really appreciate. And then all the locals that are part of this discussion. Michelle, Victor, Shay, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, this year started off like any normal year, right? It's we got the session started in January, the second year of a 2-year session. And what that means is that any bills that started the year before that didn't that were made 2-year bills have a certain pace, and they need to be finished in the second year. Otherwise, they're dead, so to speak. And the schedule was that you had to introduce any new bill ideas by February. So the old bills are the bills that are going to be moving real fast, and then any new bill ideas in February. And then I think by the beginning of March, there was a realization in the state. I'll be real frank with you. I didn't hear much about COVID in January and February. And if I did, I didn't pay much attention to it. Right. It wasn't until March hit, and then the numbers started to rise, that I realized that that something was coming. Again, I had no idea it was going to be as big as it's turned out to be. But by March, I want to see the 18th, the governor issued his order, that his stay-at-home order, and the legislature decided to send us all home and to ask us to shelter in place, and then immediately asked us to not go into our offices anymore, and that included staff. And what that did is that all the hearings that we would normally do between March and the end of May were just shelved. We're just put on hold, and we took it week by week. I think all of us thought that it was going to be a month or two that we'd be dealing with the pandemic, and then it would be over. But the point of that is that none of our bills got committee hearings, and the budget hearings that we would normally have done for the governor's January budget, we didn't do any. We did a little bit of work, but not much. And so we came back in June to the governor released his May revise in May, and then we came back to hold a couple of hearings on that May revise. Right before we left, the other thing we did is we gave the governor authority to take $2 billion in the budget and use it for COVID. and then to do a process where he reported to us what he was doing with the money, which is very unusual. It's not the way we do budgeting, but we knew that the governor was going to have to move quickly. And if we were not in session, which means we were not going to Sacramento, then we would not be in a position to give him authority, and he was going to need that kind of authority. But the reason I mention that is because it is unusual and it's odd, and then it becomes the way of doing business after a while. And the legislature has resisted the governor deciding things on his own without going through the legislative process, because we're there as the voice of the people, and the governor is really the manager of the money once we decide collectively where it's going to be spent. And so the year was very unusual, very fraught with tension around decisions that were made, or understanding how this COVID was really going to act. And frankly, by May, when they said that we might have to be locked down to July, I didn't believe it. And here we are in October, and we're looking at moving into next year in much the same fashion. And so the whole year was impacted by the shutdown and by the need to not all be together in Sacramento, and yet trying to run a government that's supposed to be responding to the needs of the public during this pandemic. So anyway, we came back in June and passed a budget. It was very difficult because there were some policy issues that were pretty important that the governor wanted to get done in the budget, and there was some resistance to some of that, but we made it through. The bottom line is that we borrowed heavily from reserves that we had created as a way to buffer us against an economic downturn, and we passed a budget without knowing what the projections were going to be for the upcoming year. None of us, as we looked in the crystal ball, could foreclose that we would be, or forecast that we would be in this economic situation where businesses are closed and people are struggling just to maintain their basic needs as a family. And so this year has really cast a pall on what our budget's going to look like next year. And by that, I mean starting December. Our fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. So this current year that we're in right now, the revenues will be pretty low, is my guess, which I believe impacted people's votes on some of the propositions. And it's created a much worse recession, at least it's projected, than we would have forecast when we were trying to create some reserves. So the bottom line is that it's just created a great deal of uncertainty. And what happened is that the Senate pro tem asked us to focus on 5 priorities that are crisis at this time. And she asked us not to push any bills that didn't deal with those 5 crises. 1 was COVID, 2 was wildfires, 3 was the lack of insurance for wildfire victims. In other words, getting reinsured, housing and homelessness. And so we did that. The Senate drastically reduced our bills, and the Assembly did not. And what that did is it created real tension between the houses, because if the Assembly was not going to reduce their bills, by the time they got to the Senate, we were working on such a limited basis. In other words, we came back in June, a little bit in July, and then had to go, and then were sent back again, home again, and came back in August to finish up all our bills. We didn't have enough time. And it created a lot of tension between the houses. And so it was a really messy, ugly end of session. And frankly, I was kind of happy because a bunch of bills died. A bunch of bills that I thought were good bills died, but in the end it was, is we just ran out of time, and it was real clear that we've got to cooperate a lot better if we're really going to focus on the issues that are the biggest issues for our constituents. And I ended up working on some very specific issues that I thought were really important. A landlord tenant relief bill, a small business tax credit, and then a California EITC, earned income tax credit bill that'll make it easier for people that are working poor, to be able to collect a tax credit that they're owed. And so it was a rather modest kind of session, but it was that, given the coronavirus. And I just have to, if I could just add at the end, is that one of the things that the Senate sends us out a memo, I want to say almost every 2 weeks, maybe not quite so much, but they've been very consistent about what they've said. I have all the staff went home in mid-March, and they're working out of their homes, and they've been provided with equipment, and we have regular Zoom meetings, and we're working on legislation for next year. And so I get a really good report on how everybody's working and the kind of constituent calls we're getting. But what the Senate made very clear from the get-go is that we were expected, when we came into the Capitol, every morning we're to take our temperature, and they gave us thermometers. I check mine every morning. And when you go into the Capitol, they check your temperature as well. And you wear a mask the entire time you're in the Capitol. And for the most part, I was working by myself in the office if I went into the Capitol. And if I was in session or in a committee hearing, I had one staff member that was at the office that could do work for me while I was in session in a committee meeting. So I have not seen most of the staff that work with me for 7 months. And that's specifically to make sure that we're reducing the risk of infection, because people are coming into what is a public office building, and it's been closed to the public, and so they're very, very careful. We spread out on the Senate floor. Nobody sits in. Half of the senators sit in their original seat. The others sit under the portico, the gallery, in a seat that was not designed for a senator, with a little table and the mic. You have to get up and speak at a mic that gets cleaned every time somebody speaks. So it's a total reorganization of how we do things, and we wear a mask the entire time we're in the Capitol. And we were told very specifically no social events. And I have to say that people took that real serious, except for one group of legislators that insisted on doing gatherings and without masks. And one of the members of that group got COVID, and they were asked, because they had been unmasked in a group setting, they were asked not to come into the Capitol, but to participate remotely and to vote remotely. And we did that. I say that because there's been allegations that we excluded them on purpose, and that it was done on purpose. But I have to tell you, it was a real serious business. And there were times when I was running the Senate as the pro tem up front, that I could see that people didn't have their masks on, or they weren't wearing them right. And when the sergeants went over and asked them to put the mask on right, they refused to do it. So the challenge is that the only way you keep people safe is if everybody agrees to the rules. And if people aren't going to agree to the rules, then you get excluded and you have to vote somewhere else. And so we did. We allowed them to vote somewhere else and to participate. And it was really a burden. I mean, it was a hassle, because it took us longer to get things done than normal. But I think in the end, it kept us all safe. So it was a weird end of session.
Yes, it was a weird end session for all of us, and the challenges you mentioned about the masks and safety protocols obviously are something the business community is struggling with as well to try and stay open and keep the infection rates
Yep.
down.
Yep.
You mentioned some really important policy things that I just don't want to get lost. Your work on the landlord tenant relief bill was a significant policy despite the challenges of COVID. In the shortened session, your work on the earned income tax credit as well as a small business tax credit were nonetheless significant policy issues that were accomplished last year. So I just want to make
Thank
sure
you.
to highlight those, Senator. And then I would be remiss if I did not highlight your activity and your work on the family leave bill that it was passed, but your advocacy for the small businesses was significant. And so I also wanted to highlight that
Thank
and
you.
your work on that as well. So thank you. All was not lost in the 2020 legislative session. There was some significant accomplishments for sure. Now,
I
with that
agree.
question, looking forward to 2021, and I'm going to turn it over in a little bit to some of our panelists who have questions. What do you expect, given that we're still dealing with the pandemic? Infection rates are somewhat going up in different counties, and it looks like we're moving into tiers where there's going to be a limited of shutdown in businesses. What impact will that have on the 2021 session?
Well, let me just say that that part of the challenge is making sure we have good science and we know how to be able to get control of this pandemic in a way that allows us to be able to start opening businesses. And so let me do real quick.
Yeah.
I have the Salinas Valley in Monterey County. And the part that I don't have is the coastal region, which is Pebble Beach, Monterey, Carmel Valley. And it's the wealthier part of Monterey County, and it's also the tourist part. And there is a movement afoot because the infection rate in that part of the county is lower to look at the infection rate by zip codes rather than census tracts, because then you can see that the peninsula has less infections, and they want to move into a different tier than the Salinas Valley. But I'll tell you that my concern is, and I want us to work on this together, is that the service workers, a lot of the service workers for that tourist industry live in the Salinas Valley, and they along with the essential farm workers. The farm workers that have been determined to be essential workers live in the Salinas Valley, and they live in severely overcrowded housing conditions because of the cost of living. And that has resulted in a very high infection rate. There is a doctor that got, from a health clinic, that got money to look at the situation to determine where the infection rate is coming from. He's ready to release his information fairly soon. And he informed me that it is the living conditions, it's not the work environment, at least according to the data they've got, that has driven the high infection rate among farm workers and other essential workers. And Monterey County started a program some time back to give vouchers to essential workers, farm workers, who got COVID or had been exposed and needed to quarantine, to be able to stay in a hotel so that they can not risk infecting their family or other household members that they live with. I was arguing that same program should have allowed people to move as a prevention issue, as a prevention measure, into hotels or less crowded housing situations, so that that we wouldn't be in this situation now. And my understanding is that, again, I'm trying to get all this data, is that Sonoma County has been able to reduce their infection rate because they've also done a voucher type of program, but more as a prevention. And so the point of all of that is that what we know is that wearing a mask and social distancing and staying away from group settings makes a big difference. And if in fact it's not the work environment necessarily that is creating the high incidence, then what we need to do is figure out how we deal with the housing situation, so that we can reduce the incidents, move into a lower tier altogether, and really focus on what the issue is, which is severe overcrowding and among people who can't afford the high rents. And so I'm looking for ways for us to be able to model some of this behavior, and to and we got to do it together, because we've got to do it together. And quite frankly, it infuriates me to be out and about and see people without a mask. I had to go up to Sacramento recently, and I stopped at the rest stop to go to the restroom, and 2/3 of the women that walked into that restroom, and I ran in and ran out, had no masks on. And so what are they saying about the importance of protecting people and doing this together? I mean, we've got to agree that we're all going to do this together, because it's important to the business community to start driving down the infection rate.
Couldn't agree with you more. It goes hand in hand, obviously, with our ability to stay open. With that in mind, Senator, I'm going to turn it over to the CEO of the San Benito Chamber, Michelle Leonard, who had a question for you about COVID and small businesses. Michelle, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for having me and for allowing our business owners to submit questions in advance. So thank you all for your time. Senator Caballero, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us.
You're welcome.
My question, yeah, for sure. My question is, many businesses in Senate District 12, including San Benito, were hit hard by the pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders. So while we have seen a lot of improvements, the unemployment rate is still pretty high and businesses are still struggling to stay open. Do you foresee the state providing any assistance to small businesses and other industries, such as restaurants, who have still been disproportionately impacted by COVID?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, the difficulty is that the state budget is it's hard to know how long or how robust the reserves that we put together for a number of years are going to last. And so the way that the way the state budget works is that Proposition 98 requires that a certain percentage of the income that comes in go towards schools. And this year, what we were able to do was to tell the school districts, we're gonna hold you, we're gonna make you whole. And so that when you shut down, we're not going to worry about how many kids show up. We usually pay out by ADA, the average daily attendance. There's no way to do that when children are learning virtually. And so basically what we said is, whatever you got the year before, you're going to get this year. And then we added resources for sanitizing and for doing things a little bit differently. And so school districts have been received, I think, a larger portion of the budget than they did the year before. The problem is if our revenue goes down significantly, then the school revenue goes down significantly, which is what we saw in 7 and 8 and 9. We don't have to do anything. It's just a trigger. Prop 98 is a minimum that schools need will receive. So what I'm worried about is that I just don't know what the revenues are going to look like at the state. And the only way that we can do programs that put money into people's pockets, and that includes the Cali ITC program, their Earned Income Tax Credit program. The only way we can put money in there is if we have the revenue or we have the reserves in order to be able to do that. I think there's a real interest in making sure that we help our small businesses. And what I'm hoping is that the federal government is going to do a stimulus package. And that what they've done in the past is they've done a stimulus package that sends money down to cities, counties, and the state. And then we use that as a economic stimulus as well. And if we can get the federal government to be our partners in this, then I feel fairly certain that small business relief is going to be one of the top priorities for us, because we recognize that in the state of California, it's small businesses are the backbone of our economy. And by helping them to survive, that's the best economic development we can do right now. So it's going to take some help from the federal government. But I do have to say that we go back in January, but the new budget is not passed until June. And so we've got a lot of time between now and then to look at how we can see part of the reason that, or one of the things we wanted to do was to create a fund for tenants and for landlords that for them to access so nobody got evicted. And we just couldn't get there because the cost was going to be so high. So that I caution any new thoughts of a new program because I'm not sure we're going to be in a position to do that. I think the budget's going to be real tight.
Thank you, Senator, for that. Talking about revenue, and you mentioned earlier in the discussion about votes on initiatives that did or did not pass in this election cycle. Victor, also with the San Benito Chamber of Commerce, had a question for you with regards to taxes. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, thank you. And Senator, thank you so much for your leadership in Sacramento. We greatly appreciate it. I know San Benito County is really happy to have you up there representing us. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Prop 15. So, very close. I think maybe reached about 52% of the vote at, last time I checked. So it looks like Prop 15 is not going to pass. What impact do you think the failure of Prop 15 is going to have on the next legislative session? And do you think that the state legislature will support additional taxes, or maybe the governor is thinking about that? I know you kind of touched on that on your last answer, but love to hear your insight on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victor, for that question. I think it's hard to understand exactly what motivated people in the end, but my sense is, and that's my sense is based on the last election cycle, and this if you put them together and you look at the tax increases that were proposed, and some of them were local, right? I think that voters right now are tired of tax increases, and I think that people are worried about the economy and they're worried about meeting their basic needs, and so that may be an oversimplification, but I think it was at any time you talk about Proposition 13, it's fraught with concern. So just as kind of a footnote, housing ownership or home ownership is the lowest in the state of California than it's been since the end of World War II. And so, it's the 1950s, and if you remember history, right after World War II, the GI Bill provided opportunities for those who had served in the military to be able to buy their first home. So there was a big housing boom and housing purchase boom in the state of California in the 50s, and we've regressed to that time. And so I think people are worried, and they're worried about how they're going to meet the needs. And so in terms of the legislature, I don't think there's a lot of appetite for raising taxes right now. The one that I think has a possibility of success is a vaping tax, because we tax tobacco products, and we don't tax vaping tobacco products or tobacco that's part of vaping. And so there's been some discussion about, and we tried to deal with that last year and couldn't get to an agreement. The governor had a proposal in the budget, and that proposal was rejected by the legislature. And there's been a lot of discussion, and I think the vaping industry understands that they do have to contribute and are willing to do it. It's just a question of how. So I think that's probably one tax that may happen, but other than that, I don't see a big appetite for it, frankly. And it's just, you know, you got to look at it and say, look, this is the worst pandemic that the world has ever seen. Well, in our time, in modern time, I'm sure the plague may beat us out, although we're getting pretty darn close to plague numbers. We need to focus on coming out of this successfully and start building economically before we look at some of these issues, as you know, that seem to come around every year. I think this is one of them. We just need to let lie for a while.
Thank you, Senator Caballero, for that. Speaking of initiatives, another very significant initiative that was debated between the business community and a priority for them was Prop 22. And Shay with the Salinas Chamber of Commerce wanted to ask you a question about that. Go ahead, Shay.
Hi, Senator Caballero. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with you. So as Jennifer said, my question is about Proposition 22, which was another business priority on the ballot this year. And it resolved the ongoing issue of independent contractor versus employee status for workers in the gig economy. So my question is, what impact do you think that the passage of Prop 22 will have in the legislature next year? And do you think that this will help other workers who have been harmed by the passage of Assembly Bill 5 get an exemption?
Well, it's you know, it's so hard to I'm looking at my crystal ball to see what the possibilities are going to are the highest likely possibility. Let me just say that that AB 5 is fraught with problems, and it created the framework created the necessity to have exemptions as the way to do business, as opposed to a test that you would use, which was what had been used in the past. And so the challenge is that that we've been dealing with this one not one industry, but kind of one category at a time, and it's just been it's been a mess. So I wasn't surprised by the passage of Proposition 22, but I think it's probably going to set up a framework where you see more attempts to create exemptions, and or another industry decides to put a lot of money behind it and do another proposition. So I don't think it settles the issue. I think it just starts creating this whole framework of I got my exemption, and so now let's figure out if yours. I mean, let me just say that part of my frustration with this whole area is that one bad actor can create really bad law. And I don't think there's any disagreement that the Dynamex company, right, took action that, in my mind, took advantage of workers, and then pushed it. It ended up that the court created law by creating this framework that all of a sudden swept all these businesses. And I'm really sympathetic, because I know a bunch of business entities, the interpreters, for example, and newspapers, the carriers, as well as the musicians and the writers, and who like working as independent contractors because they control their working environment, and they control when they work and who they work for and how they do their work. And yet the Dynamex decision swept them all into it. So now we're stuck with this patchwork, and it's I expect that you will see a number of bills with exemptions. And that's probably going to be, it's important for those workers that want to be able to work independently and don't want to be considered employees.
Right. Thank you, Senator, for that. Yes, that I think when we last counted, there might be 100 exemptions right now on.
Oh my
85.
gosh.
Yeah, I can't say for sure, but I saw somewhere that said there's 100. So I expect that you'll be right in seeing many more. Thank you, Shay, for that question. One of the other issues, Senator, that you had mentioned is housing in California. And Adam, who leads our housing policy here at Cal Chamber, wanted to follow up with you on a few questions about that. Go ahead, Adam.
Thanks, Jen. So, Senator, you're probably one of the biggest champions of pro housing production in Sacramento, and there have been a number of attempts by you to push to really address homelessness and a housing crisis that both sides of the aisle have acknowledged pretty much every year. And at the beginning of 2020, Senate leadership put out a pretty strong pro-production package of bills. One of them being your bill, SB 1385, which we supported to convert commercial vacant properties to residential, which was a really novel way of addressing both, stagnant brick and mortar, already infill development, and then get that to be quickly converted to housing with minimal environmental impacts, which was really creative. And despite the governor's push for housing, at least rhetorically, and Senate leadership putting out this package, I think it's fair to say at the end of 2020 session, we didn't, it was a disappointment to say the least, to say the legislature did not actually pass most of those bills and they ultimately died for whatever reasons. And so do you anticipate affordable housing pro-production policies to continue to dominate 2021? And my second question to follow that up was, how do you envision it being any different in 2021 than 2020? What can we do to overcome any of those barriers to produce more housing?
Well, you're absolutely right. Housing has been one of my number one priorities for many years. And, back in the day when I was on the city council, it was important because what I recognized is that if you own your own home, it stabilizes the family. And just as importantly, it stabilizes the neighborhood. You're going to stay, and you're not going to move, and you become interested in civic affairs, and your kids go to the local schools, and it creates a mindset that you're part of the community in a way that renting it's difficult when you're renting. And so I'm a big advocate for building housing, but my district is mostly, well, it's all rural. And so the question becomes, how do we do it in a way that creates an opportunity to not keep encroaching on ag land, and to build walkable communities where you can just walk out your door and get the things that you need, right? Get groceries, go to the pizza place, or go get ice cream. And that was part of the genesis for 1385, is that the way that we shop is changing. And this virus is accelerating it. More and more people are shopping on the internet. So they're not going into the brick and mortar buildings. And what you see, as if you drive around, I'm going to start taking pictures in communities that I represent, because a picture tells you 1,000 words. We've had a Kmart here in Salinas that's been vacant for, oh gosh, somebody tell me. I mean, it's got to be 3 or 4 years. And so it's a blight on that particular shopping center. And it's not generating sales tax revenue, and it could increase in value if you did some conversion to housing, and it would provide much needed housing. And then in that shopping center, you've got a Sonic, you've got a taqueria, you've got a panaderia, you've got a Chinese restaurant, all within walking distance. Across the street, the post office, more fast food places. In other words, it creates a village where people can go shopping. And so to answer your broader question, I believe that the Senate package will will resurface. I intend to refile 1385. We were in the midst of making some amendments, and so we're figuring out which amendments would we make to it now. And I believe it's a different time. I believe that my bill got caught up in some of the shenanigans that were being played over in the assembly. It's my, as I did my postmortem with people, and also it got caught up with an issue that the chair of local government was trying to get through the Senate, and she got hers through, but she wouldn't let mine through. So we'll see. It's hard to predict. Will it happen this year? I think. Let me tell you what I'm going to do differently is I have been talking to members about joining on as co-authors as part of a poor people's caucus. Not a real caucus, but just as people that are concerned about what's happening to poor people in California. And the idea is that we support bills that will help build resiliency in poor communities. I also did a bill on using the an expedited judicial process for opportunity zones, which is a federal credit program, and I couldn't get it through because the assembly had decided that because it was a program that was put together by the Trump administration, they wouldn't support anything by the Trump administration, right? Even though it was Senator Cory Booker that came up with the concept and got it into legislation. It is tax credits to build economic development in poor communities. So this is silly to be doing these kind of games. And I want to have a group of 20 to 25 legislators that are all committed to making sure that the bills get through both houses. And so I think with that kind of organizing, we can get the Senate package through if the senators want to continue, if they want to do the bills that we put together. We spent probably 25 hours on Zoom calls working with a group that had total different views about housing. And in the end, everybody signed on as co-authors because we really worked it. And so I think we can get it through the assembly, but we just ran out of time and the politics we got caught up in the politics. So I think that you're going to see a lot of the same housing bills, and hopefully this year is not truncated like last year.
Thank you for that, Senator.
They take time. They take time. And so we need to be able to sit down and have conversations about them.
Thank you for that. We want to be respectful of your time, Senator. It is 3:32, and we know we only scheduled till 3:30. So want to make sure that we are respecting your time. Are you available for one more question, or do we need to wrap it up? Okay.
Sure. I think I'm good. I'm just looking at my little calendar here. Yep, I'm good.
All right. Well, there's one other question that was submitted by one of our attendees that I want to put it on. It kind of leaves us on a positive note, and wanted to get your thoughts on it. I'm going to read it just so I make sure that I capture the thoughts of the attendee. The question was, with the change in national leadership, and as we start to heal, unite, and develop new plans to address the many challenges with a renewed vigor and cautious optimism, how do you view the part of our artists and our arts organization, especially community-based arts organizations? How can they play a part in the effort to rebuild and restore education and in the community? Your thoughts on that, Senator?
Oh my gosh, that's a hopeful and a wonderful question.
Yeah.
I think I do believe that there's a tremendous role, and part of the challenge is that so many things have been politicized, like this opportunity zones, and all kinds of things. Wearing a mask, not wearing a mask. Is the virus going to end the day after the election, and have doctors falsified I mean, there's all kinds of stories out there, right? And so I think part of healing is getting away from all of that, all saying, look, we're going to all do what we need to do to make a commitment to stem this pandemic, and then look for something joyful that takes us outside of ourselves. And the idea of art and music is really phenomenal, because if there's one thing that brings people together and makes them smile, it's the opportunity to be artistic and creative, and it's non-political. So I think there's a tremendous role. I don't know what it looks like. Maybe somebody does a concert. Maybe it's there's got to be some. I guess, let me just say that when I saw people dancing in the street, there were two things that dancing that brought a smile to my face and gave me hope. One was the dancers and the marching bands that went out to perform when there were long voting lines in a number of cities. I just thought that was so incredible. And when a group went out and they were doing the slide, and I thought, how the heck does everybody know how to do this? The electric slide, right? But the voters standing in line got excited, and they were dancing along, and the marching bands as well. I thought that was ingenious, and it was non-political, and it was just a lot of fun, and we need to smile and have fun. And the other thing was just people dancing in the streets after the election. I just thought, I wish I was near somebody who was dancing in the street, because I wanted to join. So I think that there's tremendous opportunity, and it's a question of people that are really artistic figuring out how to get us all out there and have it be a fun thing. Because I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. We're all ready for it. A little bit of break
Yep.
and enjoyment. Well, Senator Caballero, I want to thank you again for your time spending it with us, the business community. I want to thank our local chamber, our local partners, Michelle, Shay, Victor. Thank you so much. Adam, thank you for your time today. And to all of our attendees who hung in there with us and stuck with us to hear from the senator, we really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone. And again, Senator Caballero, we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.